Hello, in this video I'm going to look at trade, and this will be a non-quantitative approach talking about trade and the economics of trade. Some preliminaries. First, we should remember that only people trade. It's technically not correct to say that the U.S. trades with another country, or the U.S. trades with India, or the U.S. trades with China. It's people in the U.S. who trade with people in other countries. Restricting trade, then, really hits home on what it's all about. It's restricting people, peaceful people, from trading with whoever they want to trade with. We live in a world of scarcity. Resources are limited, so we cannot have everything that we want. Trade restrictions impose an artificial type of scarcity, making scarcity worse, limiting people's access to resources and goods from around the world. Remember that people have unlimited wants. We have unlimited wants for material goods, clothing, furniture, jewelry, whatever. Unlimited wants for a cleaner environment. The environment could always be cleaner, for more safety, more leisure time, etc. There's not a fixed amount of work that needs to be done, therefore. We could always be doing something or producing more of something else. So, for example, if the Chinese are selling us more TVs, we now have more resources in the United States to produce other things. Resources in the United States get freed up from producing TVs and now can go on to produce something else. More healthcare, more education, whatever it might be. We trade fundamentally because it is cheaper to buy a good than make it for ourselves. I don't make my own clothing, my own furniture, my own medicine, or housing. To produce these things myself would be extremely, extremely expensive. Why should we expect a country, therefore, to produce everything that it consumes? Trade is not a zero-sum game. Trade is not a football game or a soccer game where one party wins and the other loses. Trade is mutually beneficial. A trade will not take place unless both parties feel they're going to be made better off by the trade. I buy a lot of stuff from Amazon. Why? I value the goods from Amazon more than the dollars I sacrifice in getting them. Amazon benefits from trading with me. They value the dollars that I give them more than the goods that they provide to me. Trade is trade. There's nothing special about trade that takes place between people who are separated by man-made political borders. Trade between cities, trade between counties, trade between states, trade between countries. The economics doesn't change. Excuse me for 1 minute. Okay, I have to let the dog outside. Trade is like technology. It allows us to get more from a given set of resources. What would your standard of living look like if everything you consumed was something that you personally produced yourself? Trade allows me to turn economics lectures into cars, food, entertainment, housing, vacation travel, and so on. Keep in mind that the Earth's resources are not uniformly distributed across the planet. Some areas have better soil or climates for growing certain crops. Other areas have a larger abundance of certain materials, minerals, rare earth minerals. Some areas have an abundance of high-skilled labor with access to the latest and greatest in technology. That'll give rise to certain advantages. Other areas will have an abundance of low-skilled labor, which will be more suitable for producing and doing other types of tasks. Some areas it is relatively easy to get oil from the ground, not very expensive. In other areas, there's a long history of producing certain things, maybe making watches or carpeting, etc. You could grow bananas in Toronto, Canada, but imagine the cost of building greenhouses and keeping them heated. The resources would be put to better use by doing something else. It is much cheaper just to trade for bananas from people in Latin America. You could assemble iPhones in the United States, but again, imagine the cost of using resources that are better suited for producing and doing something else. It's just cheaper to have iPhones assembled in China. So now let's look at some basic pros and cons of trade. We'll start with the con side. Free trade will certainly bring more competition to our domestic firms. Domestic firms, some may lose business to foreign rivals, seeing decreased sales and lower profits. Some domestic firms will go out of business. Some domestic workers, as a result, will lose their jobs. These effects right here are highly visible. You can have a news reporter, talking to a family whose breadwinner just lost a job at a factory, who's been working there for the last 20 years. Now the pro side. Increased trade brings about increased consumer choice. It increases variety and consumption. I get to consume kiwi from New Zealand. Leads to increased competition, lowering consumer prices. And this is important here. Consumers have more money left over to buy other goods. So because we import a lot of clothing into the United States, we spend a lot less on clothing than we otherwise would. What do consumers do with those freed up dollars? These freed up dollars go to buying other goods and services, expanding other industries, providing employment opportunities in these other industries. Increased competition from foreign firms lowers input prices. Our domestic firms now have access to lower priced inputs found around the world. This reduces their cost of production, leading to lower consumer prices, which expands output for these firms and employment opportunities in these industries. So trade does not reduce the number of jobs. Remember, there's an infinite amount of work that needs to be done. We live in a world of scarcity, and we can never satisfy all our wants. Trade merely reshuffles the jobs in the economy, and it does it in a logical sense. It moves resources to their more highly valued uses. One thing about trade, when we look at the U.S. and our import categories, this is in millions of dollars. So in 2017, imports in this category, foods, feeds, and beverages, was about $138 billion. Industrial supplies and materials, about $508 billion. Capital goods, $641 billion. Automotive vehicles, parts and engines, about $360 billion. Consumer goods, the toys, the DVD players, the TVs, and so on, $602 billion. So consumer goods is not the majority of imports that comes into the United States. A large majority are capital goods, industrial supplies, and so on. So when you restrict trade, you are harming many, many of our domestic firms from being able to access lower-priced inputs. Some other things to consider. When more goods flow across borders, it is less likely that armies will be crossing borders. Markets and trade tend to civilize people. Trade leads to increased specialization and division of labor, increasing the world's output of goods and services. Trade leads to bigger markets, which increases a return to innovation because the fixed costs of research and development can be spread over more consumers. U.S. consumers say buy Japanese-made goods. The Japanese use those dollars to buy goods and services from U.S. firms, expanding employment in those industries. Those dollars that the Japanese get can also be used to lend to U.S. firms and the government. U.S. firms might need to borrow money to expand their operations, buy capital. Trade is one access for firms to get access to those dollars. The Japanese can use those dollars to buy shares of stock, to buy equity in U.S. firms. They can buy U.S. assets, real estate, build factories with those dollars or plants. The fundamental reason for the U.S. trade deficit The reason why imports exceed exports are people in the rest of the world invest more in the U.S. economy than people in the U.S. invest in the rest of the world. That is fundamentally why we have a trade deficit. The opposite of a trade deficit is a capital account surplus or a financial account surplus. So instead of the Japanese using those dollars to buy U.S. goods, they'll use those dollars to buy something else, as I laid out here in steps in the numbers 2 through 5. Claim. Trade is bad because dollars leave the country. I sort of addressed this in the last slide, but if this claim were actually true, it would be wonderful. We give foreigners intrinsically worthless pieces of paper, that is dollars, and they provide us with cars, steel, food, clothing, wanting nothing further in return. There couldn't be a better deal. However, nobody is this stupid. Foreigners accept dollars because these dollars have claims. What do they have claims on? These dollars have claims on U.S. goods and services. These dollars can be used to invest in the U.S. These dollars can purchase assets, capital, stock, and bonds. They can be used to build plants and factories in the U.S. By the way, which many of those things would make U.S. workers more productive, leading to higher wages. Some miscellaneous things to consider. Suppose a domestic firm faces increased foreign competition and successfully lobbies the government for tariffs on imported goods. What moral code puts the interests of the firm's owners above that of consumers? Why should the firm benefit at the expense of consumers who now have to pay higher price because of those tariffs or taxes on imported goods? Some workers will be harmed by trade. At least in the short run, there will be these dislocations, losing jobs, perhaps taking new jobs at lower pay, and so on. However, are these dislocations more deserving of our attention than domestic workers losing their jobs because of new products, new technologies, just changes in consumers' tastes and preferences? Keep in mind, a critical fact about the U.S. labor market is the tremendous amount of churning that takes place. Most recent data, in the month of April here, 2018, there were 5.6 million hires that took place. On the other hand, there are 5.4 million separations. Layoffs and discharges accounted for 1.7 million of those. Quits and some other reasons accounted for the rest. So in any given month in the United States, there are millions of jobs being created and millions of jobs basically being destroyed through layoffs, discharges, businesses closing, and people simply quitting for other reasons. Putting this on an annual basis, over the 12 months ending in April 2018, hires in the U.S. total 66.1 million and separations total 63.7 million, yielding a net employment gain of 2.4 million. So in any given month, there are millions of jobs being created, millions of jobs being destroyed. Any jobs being destroyed because of trade is just going to be a drop in the bucket in the grand scheme of things here. The United States would undoubtedly be poor if there were trade restrictions among the 50 states. High-wage workers provide higher productivity and are better suited for certain tasks. Lower productivity workers get lower wages and are better suited again for certain tasks. If low wages are such an advantage, then why aren't all the U.S. manufacturers moving to Mississippi, the lowest wage state in the Union? Many people claim that the U.S. manufacturing sector is dead. It is not dead. Here is a look at manufacturing output adjusted for inflation. So this is real output. Okay, these vertically shaded areas are recessions. And as you can see, the output took a big hit during the Great Recession. It has rebounded, maybe not quite at its peak before the recession, but this is a far cry from saying that we don't produce anything more in our U.S. manufacturing sector. That is not true. And I would also argue that we are understating our output. Okay, we're adjusting this for inflation, and there are inherent biases in calculating inflation, and for the most part, we are overstating inflation, and in some cases, some arguments quite significantly. So if you were to perhaps get a more accurate measure of inflation, these numbers here would be much higher, and you could probably say that U.S. manufacturing output is likely at an all-time high if you were correctly adjusting for inflation. All right, those are some preliminary thoughts. I may put together some more videos about trade. Okay, I hope you found this beneficial.